Hello, and happy Global Ivey Day 2021. This is the 12th annual edition of this worldwide event and our second virtual edition. My name is Scott Vanderwell, and I'm the chair of the Ivey Alumni Network. Today, it is my pleasure to reintroduce you to the Power Lunch and welcome you to a fireside chat between this year's Ivey Alumni Achievement Award winner, Patrick Spence, and the inaugural award recipient, Sukhinder Singh Cassidy. The theme for this year's Global Ivey Day is celebrating connections, and the conversation between Patrick and Sukhinder truly highlights this. Patrick is CEO of Sonos, a company he joined in 2012 after spending almost 14 years at BlackBerry in a variety of different roles. Over the last 9 years at Sonos, Patrick has led the company through a period of significant growth, including an IPO. And today, Sonos speakers and components are enjoyed in over 10 million homes around the world. In the conversation, you'll hear about which connections have influenced Patrick's success, the failures that have shaped him, and his perspective on being a responsible employer and employee. It's genuinely an inspiring discussion, and I know everyone watching will take away at least one lesson or two. Please, at the end of the discussion, stay tuned for a fireside chat from Joey Bergstein, CEO of Seventh Generation and last year's Ivey Alumni Award recipient.
Hello, I'm Erin. I'm Patrick's wife. Patrick and I met in 1999. We met in Waterloo and started dating that year.
Hello, I'm Jim Balsillie, and I commend the Ivey Business School for selecting Patrick Spence for their 2021 Alumni Achievement Award. Congratulations, Patty.
I met Patrick Spence, I want to say it was the winter of 2017. I was at Airbnb at the time and I was a passive candidate for a role at Sonos.
I first met Patrick about 4.5 years ago when I interviewed at Sonos.
I first met Patrick on the sports court, on basketball and volleyball. We battled against each other for years and then we eventually ended up playing together.
What really struck me about Patrick when we first met was how smart he was and also how hardworking he was.
And I came to Santa Barbara for a panel of interviews and I remember meeting Patrick. I think he was the chief operating officer at the time or the president of the company at the time. And we ended up having breakfast at a little breakfast or brunch space not too far from the Sonos office. And I remember being really impressed with the fact that we ended up going to get a meal.
As he was telling me about the culture, he shared that he tried to spend 1 week a month in one of our different offices around the world. And the first thing I thought was that this guy has a saint of a wife for supporting that kind of travel schedule. And then as I got to know him more and he explained it, I think I really was just struck by how much he cares about the people and consistently makes an effort to show up for his teams around the world. It's the kind of humble and servant leadership that is truly distinctive, especially among senior executives.
I remember thinking how refreshing it was that we just went out and broke bread together and had a conversation. And so little did I know that we would work closely together and that he would actually end up being my boss.
Patrick joined RIM fresh out of school, years before BlackBerry was even launched. And by the time he was 39, he was responsible for RIM's $20 billion revenue line. In all those years, I never had a bad meeting with Patty, only good ones.
Over the 21 years that we've been together, the 4 countries we've lived in, living in England and Australia, the US now, and also in Canada, I think about his qualities as an employee, as a leader, and he always seems to have a vision. I think he's extremely determined.
What stood out about Pat when I first met him on the basketball court? It wasn't his Steph Curry-esque first step, I'll tell you that. He's just determined. He just played every point to the max. Just a really determined athlete, just wouldn't stop. He was lots of fun to compete against.
He's a great communicator and he really cares about his team. He shares the spotlight with them, and because of that, I do think people really want to rally around him and want to do their best work for him.
He has an incredible set of values and principles, and he doesn't deviate from them. He's a bit straight-laced in that respect. You know, when we were giving everybody embarrassing nicknames, all we could come up with for Pat was P7, the first two letters of his email address, and it stuck.
I think what makes a great leader is someone who has a strong vision and someone who can articulate that vision and rally others around them to execute that vision.
Patrick leads with his humanity in everything, and I've always appreciated that. Not only the fact that he modeled that as a leader, and his modeling that so well gave me permission to show up, and lead with my humanity.
I also think you have to be someone who can attract and retain great talent. So ultimately, you have to be someone that people want to follow and want to work for.
I think Patrick is equal parts ambitious and pragmatic. He has incredibly high expectations and goals for himself and for his team.
The fact that he is a real person, the fact that you know what he values, you know what he believes, that he cares about who you are, always created a safe space to have any and every kind of conversation, whether you were taking a risk with some creative idea in a brainstorm or whether you were challenging something that you didn't make sense. Patrick, leading with his humanity, always made for a safe space to have the right conversation, whatever that may be.
And he cares deeply about people and the world around him.
And his strong commitment to his values have enabled him to really succeed and always see through the muck in life and find the right path forward. He really has a way of bringing the best out in people, and I'm proud to call him one of my closest friends.
He's honest, sincere, he's authentic. I think he's always willing to look at himself. He's willing to have feedback, always trying to make himself better.
If I had to describe Patrick in one word, it would be integrity.
He really tries to do the right thing always and to inspire that in everyone around him.
I think I'd probably have to say rock. That's maybe a bit of a cheesy answer, but Pat's one of those guys that, if you're close with him or you work with him on a management team and you're struggling with something, at least in my life, I often think to myself, what would Pat do?
I guess drawing off of my humanity parallel, it would be empathy, or the fact that he's empathetic. And again, I think just creating that connection that he has on a personal level and a professional level with everyone he comes across is so incredibly powerful.
I think if you asked me one word to describe him, it would be thoughtful. I think he's thoughtful as a father, he's thoughtful as a husband, and he's thoughtful as a leader. He really cares what people think. I think he really takes people's opinions, their feelings, their thoughts into account in everything that he does.
Success is not about guessing. It's about being capable and being prepared. And these professional and personal capabilities are why he has achieved so much to date, with so much more achievement to come. Congratulations again, Patrick.
Well, first of all, I am delighted to be here interviewing you for the being the recipient this year of the Ivey Alumni Achievement Award. It's a pretty special honor, and for me, it's always fun to talk to you. So selfishly, I get another excuse. So looking forward to it.
Me too.
So Patrick, it's interesting because you and I, every time we get together, we have a lot to talk about. But one of the fun places to start this conversation is really on the topic of connections. We could go many places in this conversation, but it actually happens at this year on Global Ivey Day. What the school and the alumni is celebrating is really the power of connections. So I'm really, really curious, when you think back to your career, a fun place to start is like, who really has helped shape it? And who, in your powerful set of connections was really a galvanizer of opportunity for you?
Well, I think one of the interesting things I've learned about my career, and I think myself through the 23-year journey I've been on, is really that, it's really about me, the person, right? And the community versus, necessarily just the people in a professional setting, right? And so I would go back right to the beginning and say, my parents, right? In terms of my parents really instilling for me a sense of determination, competitiveness, integrity, and then I think it's my wife been an incredible connection for me, an incredible partner. Our mutual friend, Scott Galloway, talks about the most important decision in your life being who your partner will be, right? And I think that's something that for me rings very, very true, because she's been there, throughout to make sure that I can use her as a sounding board, and that she's supporting what needs to happen at home when there's things happening in my career that take me away and are demanding, and there's travel and there's all sorts of things. And then I think about my friends from Ivey. So I played volleyball and went to Ivey with 3 other fantastic people who have had a lot of success. And, having them and having gone through a lot together in terms of both the sporting experience and the Ivey experience just sets us up for being able to help each other with some of the navigation of career and life and those kind of things. And those are really special connections to me. As I think about getting more into the professional world, I do think that you can learn something from everyone. And I've really learned that over time. And I think that's the best part of all of this, is the chance to get to meet amazing, incredible people and learn from them. And certainly I think about people like Jim Balsillie and Mike Lazaridis, who were the co-founders of RIM, and the impact they've had on my life in terms of getting a chance to work really closely with 2 of Canada's finest entrepreneurs, and really seeing up close what it takes to build a great company, right? And there's so many people at RIM and so many great Canadians, and I'm so proud of that, right? The fact that we were able to build a global company in Canada. And I think it was just wonderful. People like Don Morrison, who was our COO and had 25 years of experience to that point. And then I think about the people at Sonos as well. And we had 4 co-founders of Sonos, and all of those folks have been tremendous in terms of really instilling a sense of building culture into the organization and getting some product decisions right for the long term that I think we actually had issues with at RIM. And so it's been like a new learning in terms of some of those folks. And then the last group I would probably say is our board and our board of directors. And, I had an impression of the role a board of directors would play at one point in my life, and thought, okay, they're making decisions. They're the ones that are the kind of, almost like telling you what to do, but not at all, right? They're there to support you as a leader and push you and help challenge you, but also just support in the sense that they're helping with other connections, helping you broaden your network, helping you get new perspectives that help you be a better leader, be a better person, and grow the company. So connections are everything as we think about, I think, our careers and really our life and the people that we become over time.
Well, I think you speak to so many things in that. First of all, that there's an interconnectedness between our personal and professional connections, and we're sort of kidding ourselves if we think those two aren't just the both halves of who we are, and one enables the other, right? Work has such your work connections actually shape who you are as a human being, and everybody who shaped you at home, and in fact, are sort of shaping the other side of who you are as a leader. And then I would just say that inevitable negotiation with your spouse and the support of your spouse that I would triple down on as sort of being one of the most important professional decisions you can make. But you're speaking to the power of having many rings of connections.
Yes.
Right? And I think you spoke to one other thing, which is you can learn something from everyone. And I think this notion that different parts of your networks are going to sort of bring these sort of just amazing different perspectives. And yeah, it is a privilege to have all those perspectives, right? As you develop.
Definitely.
There. Of course, the other thing people are always fascinated about when they think about leadership journeys are not only who made you successful, but it's about what experiences made you successful and what experiences shaped you maybe the other direction. So before we talk about the things that sort of made you successful, I think I'm somebody who thinks a lot about failure and what failure enables. So talk about some of your non-successes and maybe the seminal experiences that shaped your career that were not what others would consider successful.
Well, I think if I have to think about the biggest failure, it would have been, and challenge would have been, we were at a really pivotal time for Research in Motion, the company behind BlackBerry. And there was a group of us in the company that were trying to convince the company to pivot to BlackBerry Messenger and enterprise software when we were running a business selling $20 billion a year in hardware. And we felt there was a really hard decision that needed to be made to pivot, right? Which is critical in a company's lifetime, and that we were in a situation where it would be very hard to continue to compete on the hardware side. But that's what we had done, for to that point, about 20 years that we had been in business. And so that was a situation where I really wasn't able to, convince the company, convince everybody that that was the right way to go. And so, I think about that every single day, because it's something where, I feel if we would have made that pivot, we could have continued to be, relevant and growing, and played a different role than RIM plays today in the world, or now BlackBerry plays in the world today. And so that's something that I took with me, and it actually caused me to leave the company after 14 years of being there. It was that, big a deal. And so, to me, that's probably the seminal failure of my career that will live with me forever, right? And particularly being Canadian, and somebody who, if you would cut me, would bleed BlackBerry, is just very, very painful. But also, again, it is instructive. And now at Sonos, I use that to make sure that we are thinking about everything that's out there and how we potentially think about, something that maybe would be considered sacrilege in a world where you have to be very focused. And so we recently partnered with IKEA, where we've actually taken the brains of what we do in our software and put that inside products that IKEA develops. And that's very different than the business that we've been in traditionally, but it's something that, you can see has a linkage to what we're really good at, which is, that software, that sound, and really the brains behind it. And so that's almost a direct, I would say, connection to something that I saw at RIM and somewhere I failed, and now putting that into practice and kind of thinking differently as a result, today. So I think my big thing would be learning from any of those kind of situations. I've been very fortunate to have found, that to have been put in positions to be successful in so many different ways and different roles that I've had across RIM in particular, and now at Sonos. And I think you're learning, though, there's failures you're having every day, whether it's somebody that you're hiring that doesn't work out, right, or a direction that you're going. But I also feel like oftentimes people will give up too early on some things. And so you really need to be determined as well in terms of the way that you, the way that you live kind of day to day, and the way that you lead your career.
So I want to ask you a slightly more personal question about failure before we move off this topic, which is, we all know about the correlation between failure and learning, although it's very hard when it happens to you, right, to see that moment. So let's talk about one of the more personal aspects, though, as a leader of failure. How did you personally recover at RIM? And what I mean is like the psychological recovery mode. Like it's you can tell yourself in your head, I'm learning from this, and you can even describe it later. But when things don't go your way, even today, do you have a way in which you cope?
I definitely do. It is talking to those friends I mentioned, the friends from Ivey, talking to my wife. And then I have a really focused, plan around physical health and making sure that I'm spending time outdoors and working out. And I find that really grounds me. I think everybody needs to find their thing. I know for some people it's meditation. Some, it might be playing an instrument, right? Or listening to music perhaps. And then for me, what I find is getting outdoors and doing physical activity and really being consistent on that just creates a grounding where I can put those failures and setbacks in perspective. And so that's been critical to me, and not something I realized early in my career, but later in my career, I found I'm a better leader and person as a result of prioritizing the time that I take to be outside and be active.
Yeah, it's well, I think you're speaking to this note of like, what do you do to give yourself recovery time? And I think most people sort of love to talk about, what they learned, and that's amazing. But I think how we recover everybody has their tips and tricks. For you, it's exercise. For me, sadly, it's things like shopping, but it is like, it's literally the thing that makes my brain switch off. And sleep. I often say to people, when I'm upset about something, I'm now at least at the point in my career or my life where I know that if I go to sleep in the morning, it's like 15% better. And if it's really upsetting, I know that if I can just get to the weekend, by Monday, literally, there's this like cycle I know I'm going to go through, and then I will feel like I can cope with whatever it is.
You're totally right. You're totally right. And I just want to build on that, because I think it's so important, because oftentimes I think early in our careers, we think we need to power through it, and we need to work all night, right, to solve that issue. Or I can't make that time with my spouse, or I can't make time for that workout because there's this issue that I need to deal with. And you are so right. A good night's sleep, a workout, shopping, anything, it's whatever, it's knowing yourself, right? To know what does it take, right, to get yourself recentered and be in a position where you get some perspective too, right? Because I think sometimes, I've had a wonderful career, and we've made, one company, we made mobile phones. At this company, we make the best wireless speakers in the world. So it's also important to put it in perspective, and that's important and impactful. But the most important thing is how you're leading your life and your family. And there's so many other things that you have to be putting in perspective as you're reflecting on your professional life and some of those setbacks professionally.
Yeah, absolutely. It's I think there's something so important there. And I certainly, earlier in my career, even now, my first instinct when there's a problem is to solve it, and
Totally.
that I feel at rest until I solve it. But interestingly, sometimes I'm so much better at solving it if I just, like I say, I understand that, I need perspective to solve the problem, as opposed to saying powering through is the right answer. But it's hard, right? Because your
It
first
is.
instinct when something is failing isn't, until it is done, you don't give yourself a break, without realizing that giving yourself a break may actually help you solve the problem.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, look, you've spoken about the seminal experience that RIM and BlackBerry had on you. Obviously, it's a Canadian experience, to your point. Like, it's really hard for anybody who's Canadian not to know the journey of RIM and BlackBerry. In their own space, they were the dominant at one point, and then quickly the underdog. Sonos. I love Sonos speakers. You know this. I have them all through my home. But fair to say, just like great product experience, and then the emergence of so many competitors who are giants. I mean, FANG, right? Every company
Yes.
has a play in your space, which is pretty daunting. So, when you think about being the underdog, how much do you use that underdog energy? How does it motivate you? How does it scare you? How do you manage this kind of situation of just ridiculous competition?
Yeah, and I think we all tell ourselves stories, right? And I definitely tell myself the story of the underdog right from day one in my life. And my parents didn't go to university. We didn't have a lot of money, and so it's something where I look at it and say, that this is like, I've always kind of been feeling like I'm the underdog. Like, a lot of the teams I played on early were underestimated, and we didn't necessarily have the best talent, but I found that I was often given the opportunity to be the captain, and that we could be successful if we worked together, right? And we all played a different role in there. And so I really felt the entire way, like through my career, and even joining, RIM, which at that point was less than 200 people, and doing some engineering projects at that point. But I could see something special with Jim and Mike, and I felt like there was a product vision there. And doing it in Canada in particular, not Silicon Valley, was viewed as something that we're just crazy, where there's no way we could compete with Motorola, Nokia, all of those players at that point. And I've used that to motivate me for sure, in terms of thinking, okay, we are going to do this, and we can prove people wrong, like at every stage, and we all find those kind of motivations within ourselves as well. And coming to RIM, or coming to Sonos rather, it's a situation where we were up against early on big players like Sony and Bose, and we were able to build a business because we disrupted the industry with software and wireless and technology. We put ourselves in a situation where we were able to, really defeat the first wave of large incumbents. And then I always joke that as a reward, we got to face Amazon, Google, Apple coming into our category, right? And so we remain the underdog, which to me is great in a way, because, the story continues, if you will. And it's a bit of the chip on the shoulder. But I think in this day and age, it's even harder, right? It was one thing at RIM and with BlackBerry, because the world was a little bit different. And so Microsoft, for instance, and Qualcomm had tried to do something to take us out. There are obviously other competitors along the way. But it was very different than today's world, where Amazon, Apple, and Google have so much power, right? And so it creates this interesting dynamic where we actually partner with them in many ways. And then on the other side, we actually compete with them. And so trying to navigate that, and in fact, we sued Google. So we actually are still working with Google, but at the same time, I've sued them for infringing our intellectual property. I mean, trying to navigate that has been interesting. So we've been able to, but I also, again, want to stand up for what we've invented, all the hardworking people at Sonos. And so I felt it was important that we actually take that measure, as difficult as it is, and as much as I knew it would have an impact on our partnership. So these are the kind of hard things that are faced, and I think are unique to being the underdog. But it's also a story I tell myself, and I think you also have to reflect on the fact that I'm very fortunate because I grew up in Canada, where education, healthcare, you can go to a university like Western and go to Ivey without having to go deeply in debt like in the United States. And so those kind of things have been a huge benefit to me. And so it's also a story I tell myself to motivate myself, right? And keep that chip on my shoulder and go through it. But I also count myself very, very lucky and grateful to have been born in Canada and grown up in Canada.
All right, Patrick, I'd love to pick up on this point of being the underdog, because clearly it motivates you. But what is your advice for all the people who are paralyzed at the thought of competition? Because I'm sure there are people listening to this going, I would look at that situation and literally be fear-based and not able to act. And clearly for you, that's, it's been a motivator. But any advice for people for whom it may not come so easy to think about?
Yeah, I think there's always opportunity, and there's always, look, I've also picked positions where there's a confluence of trends that create new opportunities to, what would you say, disrupt an industry, right? Or incumbents. And so I shouldn't probably underplay that from a professional perspective, which is I also educated myself and had a very strong conviction that these would be great opportunities long-term, because we were developing an angle and saw trends and understood some consumer insights differently than the other players that are there. I think you need to find that angle, and you need to have the conviction that, okay, I can do that. If you can't find that angle on something, then I think, I don't know how you would do it, right, in terms of being able to do that. But I think it's having that conviction. It's having that conviction in yourself, and a bit of determination, I would say, around that. And I'm not sure how one instills that in themselves other than getting into it, right? And so as I think about a lot of playing sports, right, and getting into that, and that, you talked about failure. I mean, that's one where you're being judged in a period of time in a very strong set of rules, and you're having lots of wins and losses, right? And in that situation, you're having to pick yourself back up after a point and play again, right? And keep doing that, and you keep going. And so I think that actually my athletic background probably plays a role in the way that I think about determination, and I think about playing the long game, if you will. But I do think professionally, as I think about my career and being at the two companies I've been at, making sure that there is an advantage that you see, or a potential advantage, is absolutely critical. And then the one other thing I would say about competition, particularly in a professional sense, is we often reduce stories down to something simple that we can really understand. So, BlackBerry died because of Apple. No, BlackBerry died because of the choices we made, right? And Jim Collins does a really good job of pointing this out, is that most companies that, fail, whether you fail or prevail, is really more about what you do to yourself versus what other companies do to you. And so a lot of it is, finding your angle and understanding that it's not about what others are necessarily doing.
Yeah, it's, I think, well, first of all, I think that's a very important point, that you can control what you can control. I think you said two other things that are pretty illustrative, I think, for how you do it. Number one is sometimes it's just about getting into motion, right? You sort of said you just have to get into it. So the most daunting thing, obviously, is trying to think about, beating Google over the next 10 years. But it's much easier to think about, what do I need to do tomorrow, to get started? And knowing that if you get started, like, more will reveal itself. So I think the getting started piece is as you pointed out, is quite critical to the competition question and how you look at competition. So that strikes me as a pretty key point in how you wake up every day and sort of face battle. Yeah, it's I always think that this is a tough one, because I know that you can look at something like what's ahead of you and just never get started, and so then
Yes.
it's like how do you get into it? And I think so many of your points are valid. Um, so I think people are probably already getting a sense for you as a leader on this conversation. But if we were to sort of walk into Sonos or walk into RIM or walk into any of the places that you have been and led or been led by, what would be the most common things people say about how you lead?
Hmm. So I think at RIM, it would have been different. And I think I've learned and matured over time. So I think at RIM, it would have been, very hardworking, high integrity, but I carried a lot on my shoulders. So even when I left, I had 19 direct reports, which like is impossible to properly lead and develop, right, in any way. And I prided myself on being involved in our very biggest deals and trying to be involved in really everything, because I thought that was the definition of leadership, and just being across everything and being involved in all the impactful items. Well, and over time, what I learned, and John, the founder, one of the co-founders of Sonos, really helped me with this. It became much more, and again, I think thinking back to the failures of RIM, I think it became much more for me, and where I spend my time today is 50% of my time is really on the culture and building the culture of the organization and helping my team and helping develop others. And then 50% is on the strategy. Whereas, at RIM, it was probably executing and thinking through the strategy 90% of the time, quite frankly. And so I think this is probably just because of going through what I've gone through, but as well, as you get a little bit older, you're getting reflective on what your leadership means, right? And for me, what I really want to leave behind when my time at Sonos is done is an adaptable, admired, and enduring company, right? And so we've actually created, so again, taking learnings and thinking about development, we have two ambitions at Sonos. One is to be the world's leading sound experience company. So that's kind of the what, but then the how is we want to be an adaptable, admired, and enduring company where people can do the best work of their lives and everyone feels welcome and included. And so again, that is where we've actually stated it. And that's important to me. And that's what I want to leave behind in the world, because I believe, you mentioned it before, like we have impact in a certain circle and with a certain group of people. And, eventually people will come and go from the organization. And as they go start other organizations, as they go join other companies, if I can have that impact on people where they're thinking in that way and they're helping develop others and they're building strong cultures, I think it's going to have a huge impact on the world. And that's the way that we can actually have that impact. So I'd say very different than if you'd ask somebody about the leader I was, 10, 15 years ago today. And I think the other thing is, from a communication perspective, I just spend a lot of time, making sure that I'm talking to our people, hearing from our people, trying to be as open as possible to hear what's going on, get feedback, and then changing, right? And adapting. And that's why adaptability is such an important part. That's why it's part of our ambition too, is because this world is moving so quickly. And the key isn't, sticking to one thing or necessarily doing one thing. It's about how you adapt as an organization, right? And can you build that into the culture? Because that's what's going to get you through, 10, 20 years ahead, not just the next quarter.
It's interesting that you talk about your leadership evolution. You've been on your own journey, obviously, from RIM to Sonos. I'm sure you would say, as many leaders would, that this past year has been another evolution of your leadership style. So if you think about what have you had to adapt in your style, or what have you learned in terms of new leadership skills as a result of the pandemic?
Yeah, we immediately kind of stopped everything we were doing in a way and said, okay, what's important now, right? When the pandemic hit, and there were three things. The first was to support our people, and this was we have a Sonos session every week. We shifted to weekly as a result of the pandemic because that communication is important. And so at the first one, I'd worked with my leadership team, and then we said, okay, let's set these priorities. The first was support our people. The second was bring more joy to more people, right? So very in line with what we do, right? Because what we do is fundamentally bring joy to people. So how do we take our product at this point and get it into more people's homes and really help them have a little bit of joy when we're all stuck at home? And then third, how do we get positioned for the future, right? What do we need to do as we take a little bit of a step back and try to figure that out, and we think of a post-pandemic world? What do we need to do? And so it was something that really changed our focus, if you will, right from where we had been, and approach that. And like I mentioned, we moved to a weekly Sonos session, and I think that's been absolutely critical. And people, then people began to see me at home as well, which was like a whole different thing. And I think I became more authentic and vulnerable. There were some tears that I had a couple of times, just in terms of some of the challenges that were there and what people were going through, and obviously the devastation of the pandemic and the way it was impacting people. And then we got into, the racial injustice in the United States as well through that period. I mean, it was such a heavy period that we got into, but I was so glad to be, talking to the team every week, taking questions from the team every week. And I mean, we're not small, we have 1,500 people, but it's a time every week that people can join. They learn what's going on, they hear from me, and then they can ask questions about what's happening. And so I think that communications and that frequency of communication, I plan to keep up post-pandemic. So that's definitely, been something that will stick with me. And I think becoming even more vulnerable as a leader, I think I've kind of become more vulnerable, every year, every day as a leader through this, and recognizing that's the right way to lead, and it's the most powerful way to lead. But I think this pushed me even further, and it was a little uncomfortable at times. But I think it's the right thing. I think it's more powerful, and I think it's more authentic at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think this trend towards cultures and teams wanting to know what their leaders stand for, what their leaders look like, underneath sort of the veneer of leadership, I think is not going anywhere anytime soon. Which brings us actually to, and you already touched on it, but maybe a very related topic. You and I had the privilege of doing another panel, I think at the end of 2020, that was really focused on what teams expect from their leaders in today's world. Like, what do our customers expect from us? What our employees expect from us as leaders? But this broadens to the area of really and I don't want to use the word corporate responsibility because it's a very cliche word, but can we just say, what do we think we're responsible for? What do you think you're responsible for as the leader of Sonos beyond delivering shareholder value? What do you think for Sonos to be as you pointed out, an enduring, a great company, a company with a great culture, a responsible company? What does that mean?
It means being in touch with what it is. People all want to be part of something special, right? And they want to be respected. They want to be a place where they can do the best work of their lives. And I think as we think about attracting the best talent, it has to be a place that people feel comfortable, and that especially when you're building products the way we are, you need a diverse set of perspectives, right? Because if not, you're going to miss some part of the market, right? And so I think it's really important that every company, and I really started this journey a few years ago, really triggered by some of the racial injustice that I saw in the United States, and making sure that we are thinking broadly about the talent we're bringing into the organization, just again, so we can build the best products that are out there. I also think it's the right thing to do. And I think it's as we look to attract more and more employees, what I'm finding is it's important to them. People want to be part of something that is trying to do the right thing, right? And trying to build, products for everyone, and working through that. And so that is what it's going to take to build a great company and a great business by extension, right? And so I think in this day and age, the most important constituency is probably your people, right? We often, in the past, it was often, okay, the customer's always right. What are you doing for the customer? And some of those things. But if you don't have, motivated people that are working well together, that believe, you're not going to be able to satisfy the needs of any customers, right? Or any investors or shareholders or any of those things. And I think people are becoming so much more thoughtful about where they want to spend their time. And that's what is always on my mind as we're thinking about talent, and we're thinking about the kind of company that we're trying to build. So for my leadership team, when we go through, half of their review is essentially the what did they achieve, but half of it is how did they achieve it? Are they building a team that believes in our behaviors and values, and are living those? And are they building a diverse team? Are they building an inclusive culture on the team as well? And so that's something that I think is critical to being successful as we think about the next decade and 20 years out, 50 years out.
So So I think you sort of think about the importance of employees in as stakeholders in the culture in the company you're building, and that is a big part of your responsibility, right? If I were to move this conversation as we draw towards the end here to how do you think, if you're on the other side of this, about not just being a responsible employer, about being a great employee, about starting a career that many people will hope emulates the success that you've had in your career. So let's switch gears and say, let's move you from sort of, having the opportunity to talk to students, recent grads, alum about like, okay, this is my part. Now here's your part. Here's what makes sort of, has the beginnings of a tremendous career. What advice would you give people?
Well, my first piece of advice would be to read your book. So Sukhinder has a book coming out, and I think that's very helpful for recent grads, new grads, because it takes us through your journey, right? With all of this. And I think one of the things, there's really three things I would say on this. And for me, the first one would be true to yourself. So you talk about this a little bit too in the book. And I certainly went through this journey where there's a lot of pressures that are coming at all of us in terms of what's the right career, what's the right thing to do, where are all your colleagues going, right? And your classmates and these kind of things. And I know it's hard. Where do your parents want you to go, right? And so, I know it's hard, but I think part of the work and part of the importance is to be true to like what you believe and what makes sense for you as a person, the kind of company to join, the kind of role that makes sense for you. And so I think the first is be true to yourself. I think the second is, and this may take a job or two, a company or two, but figure out what you're good at. I think you have to, I think it's important to get in there and, like you said, motion, right? Like get in there, get your hands dirty, figure out, hey, am I good at investment banking? Am I good at consulting? Or am I good at something completely different, right? And am I good at leading people? Am I good at, designing products, right? All of these kind of things. And so I think, getting in gear and figuring out what you're good at is so important. And then the last thing I think is, really, I'd say stick to it is probably the way I would put it, which is, I think I often see today people giving up a little bit too soon, right? And almost in the culture a little bit, or in society, we've created a situation where any challenge or any pain, it's like, just extract yourself. And I think I've been, had the good fortune to be at two amazing companies, and probably like it's very odd in this day and age to have been at one for 14 years, now at Sonos for 9. But I think part of it is there's ups and downs all throughout, and sticking with it, is important, because you learn how to get up again, right? When you get knocked down, and figure these things out and push through. And I think that really is rewarding in the end, because you're building something and you're building towards something. So yeah, so that would be my advice to anybody in, today starting out.
Well, it's so funny you mentioned this. I think it was on LinkedIn today. I posted a quote from our common friend, Scott Galloway. He always writes the smartest newsletters, as you know. Yeah. He was super witty and smart. But in one of his newsletters, he sort of said, people who talk to you about following your passion are already rich. Follow your passion. Which I really thought was like the best quote. Just this idea of like, find what you're great at, and you will get passionate about what it means, to contribute and to have impact, and find passion in whatever you're doing if you can follow your talent. So I particularly love that piece of advice from you. And as we wrap up here, I'm sure everybody's curious. You can't sort of give away the secret roadmap for you at Sonos. We understand that you're a public company, but talk to us what you're thinking about professionally in the next 5 years. What does it look like for Sonos, and what does it look like for you, like Patrick Spence, the leader?
Yeah, I mean, I hope that I can build something that lasts well past me, right? And so I think where I've reached in my career at this point is, how do we create a company that lasts for decades to come, right? And so that means a lot in terms of building that adaptability into the system, getting the right people in the right roles, and making sure that when my time here is done, that there are multiple people internally that can step into the role. I think that will be like one of the important tests that I'll put myself through and say, okay, we have people in the organization that can step into my role. I think that's like kind of the first step. And then the longer step is, 30, 40 years from now, when I'm not at Sonos, can I look back and is the company still growing and relevant? And if it is, then I'll have been so proud to have played, a part in that.
Well, on that note, we hope and trust you will have continued and enduring success at Sonos. So thank you for joining us. It's been really
Thanks,
fun.
Sukhinder.
Wow. Well, what a year it has been. So first, I'll want to make sure everybody knows that Seventh Generation is a leading manufacturer of eco-friendly home and personal care products in the United States. We have a small business in Canada, but we're very well known in the US. And what a time to be in a business. COVID hit us early and hit us hard. I remember we were back in January, we saw 3 cases in Seattle. And we started to increase our inventory levels just in case we were to see a bigger impact. And we're actually at that point probably most concerned about the supply chain disruptions coming out of China. And then the first week of March, we saw our orders surge. We saw our Amazon orders for the week go up by about 7-fold, our orders from Target go up by about 5-fold. And keep in mind that this is a business where you always try to plan to be able to respond to a 30% surge in growth. And so that kind of an increase is really challenging to respond to. And what ensued over the balance of the year was, I would call it a constant state of triage. We were working hard to create flexibility. We were bringing on new suppliers. We were qualifying new materials that would stay true to the deep authenticity standards that we have in the products that we create. We kept our offices open for our R&D team to come into our labs to make sure that we could qualify alternative ingredients and materials that fit those standards. We were putting different color caps on different bottles just so that we could continue to stay in production and meet the demand that we're seeing. We saw over the course of the year a 50% increase in projects and products than what we would normally see in a given year. And as a result, we saw really unprecedented growth. And above and beyond that, on the business front, it was the people front that was the most important. I would say we were in a constant state of caring for our community, caring inside for our employees, caring on the outside for the broader community, and really trying to do all we could to get the important goods and services that people needed to be able to cope with the pandemic that was in front of us all. I consider myself to be a servant leader. I really try to support people, give them what they need to be able to be successful. I see that as my job. But I think in the last year, I shifted from a people first to a family first leader. And it was really clear that we had our employees across a really wide spectrum, where we had single employees who were dealing with the loneliness of being stuck in an apartment all by themselves, or people with young kids. We have a lot of people who have young kids in their family, and they're trying to take care of their kids, do homeschooling, while they're still trying to do their job as best as they possibly can. And so we spent a lot of time over the course of the year really trying to keep our community connected while most of us were working virtually, and to enable people to create time and space to be able to prioritize their families, to be able to not be overwhelmed by being in these constant Zoom meetings. We created something that we called Meatless Wednesdays, where we said, okay, no meetings on Wednesdays, so that you can recover from morning to night meetings Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and have some space during the day to be able to do the work, so that wasn't being pushed into the evening. That's just one small example, but we were really trying to think about how do we support our people and support their families, so that they could really take care of themselves holistically as they're going through the crisis. I would say the second thing that became really clear was just that this was a time for leaders to take bold stances. In the US, we saw a reckoning on race that came on top of this COVID pandemic. The climate crisis continues to endure, and we saw real challenges around voter access to being able to vote. And I'm a new US citizen. We got our citizenship in 2018 because we wanted to be in a position to be able to vote in the 2020 election. I was shocked actually how quick it was for us to be able to get our citizenship. And it really made me reflect on how different it is for me as a white man being able to easily get citizenship. Now, granted, I've lived in the US for about 20 years, but by contrast, we had people at the borders being separated from their families and unable to get status to even stay, let alone citizenship. So I would say as a leader, we spent a lot of time really raising our voice, using the platform and the power of our brand to try to raise awareness on some issues that we might not normally take stances on, just because we knew that we could make an impact and felt that it was the right time to be able to do that. The lessons learned for me are divided into two areas. So from a business standpoint, there are three things I took away from this pandemic. So one was about the importance of redundancy and ensuring that you've got a supply chain that can respond to the demand surges. And similarly, as demand goes away, being able to shrink in a way that doesn't create chaos. The second thing was about relationships and the importance of building strong relationships with your suppliers, with your customers, to be able to work together, to be able to move through the ups and the downs of the business in that kind of a cycle. And thirdly is just resiliency and the need as a business, as leaders, to be resilient, to know that we're living in a dynamic world and that things are going to change. And how do you prepare your people to be able to respond to the change that's going around you? So those would be the lessons I think I learned as on the business front. On the macro front, I also took away three big lessons. And one is that we're living in a global interconnected world. Who knew that a flu in China was going to disrupt the entire way of living around the world for over a year? And we're still not through this pandemic, are we? Secondly, the government makes a difference. We really saw that in the US with the change of administration. We saw a different response to actually being able to get vaccines out and to be able to effectively start to vaccinate the population at scale. And I think there's often a debate about government and its role, and clearly it can have a meaningful role in making change. And then the third piece, I think, is just around a sense of urgency. We're living in a time right now where it's urgent that we take action on climate. It's urgent we take action on racial equity. And if we don't act with urgency, we're going to be faced with these crises in an unresolved way for a long period of time. So a huge congratulations to this year's winner of the Ivey Alumni Achievement Award, Patrick Spence. Thank you so much for bringing music throughout my house. Really appreciate the work that you do, the work that your company is doing, and just a really big heartfelt congratulations to you.
What an inspiring conversation. And congratulations again to all three Ivey Alumni Achievement Award winners. As you continue on your day, I encourage you to think about who in the Ivey Network has influenced you. And please reach out and celebrate those connections. Thanks again for joining us, and I wish you a very happy Global Ivey Day.